You're listening to The Physician's Mind, raw stories and real talks from people striving for greatness in medicine and in life. This is where ambition meets action and where the relentless come to level up. I'm your host, Curtis Wilkerson. Thank you so much for listening. Let's get right into it. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Physician's Mind podcast, where we explore the clarity, discipline, and strength that it takes to thrive in medicine and in life. Today's guest is Dr. Michael Collins, a surgeon, father, and best-selling author whose books like Hot Lights, Cold Steel, and Blue Collar, Blue Scrubs pull back the curtain on the emotional heights and lows of becoming a doctor. So, Dr. Collins, thank you so much for joining me today, sir. It's an honor to be speaking with you. How are you today?
I'm just fine, thanks, and it's an honor to be on your show. Thanks.
Of course. So, Dr. Collins, what is it that first drew you to medicine, and what made you believe you could actually do it? Because you have a very unique background.
Yeah, I was not your typical pre-med college kid. I didn't even desire to go into medicine until I'd been several years out of school. So I was a construction worker after I graduated from college. And I was working one day, and in fact, can I read you a little bit from a Blue Collar, Blue Scrubs?
Please do. Please do.
So I was on a construction job. It was an extremely hot day, and I was working with a bunch of guys that I'd been with for a couple of years. Is profanity to be avoided?
No, whatever's natural.
So I was working. It had been a very hot day. We had all nearly killed ourselves with the heat, and I was sitting with one of the old guys who had been working for the company for years, and we were all in bad shape. It had been so hot. So he said to me, "Look around you, boy." And I nodded and said, "Yeah," without looking up. "No, God damn it," I said, "look around." I lift my head and look at the men around me, suddenly realizing how much everyone else is suffering. Men are slumped against trucks and leaning on trees. 3 of the older guys are lying in the shady side of a compressor, boots off, eyes bulging, mouths open, panting miserably. Lester is in the bushes, bent over with the dry heaves. "You're young," Jesse says, "and it ain't too late. Look around you, and you remember what you see. And then you get the hell out of here, or you'll wind up like me, an old sack of shit laying in the dirt." "Jesse, you're not—" "Don't you fuck with me, boy," he says. "Don't you fuck with this old man." He raises his bloodshot eyes and fixes them on me. "I'm telling you God's own truth. You don't want to listen, that's your business, but don't you fuck with me. I'm too old to be fucked with, and pretty soon you be old too, and there ain't nothing you can do about it. But you can do something about this." He gestures around us. "You can spend your life on a breakout gang, throwing rocks like the rest of us no-account fools, wasting our lives away, waiting to be thrown on the junk pile, or you can get out before it's too late." And that was sort of my wake-up call. It didn't immediately lead me into medicine, but I thought, I don't know how I must have been 24 years old at the time, something like that, and was a little boy. I mean, life was fine. I liked working construction. We made good money. I liked drinking beer and playing sports. But from that point on, I started to think about what I wanted to do with my life. Eventually, it led to medicine.
Wow. Yeah, that's quite the wake-up call. I mean, at one point, you have to realize, what's next? What am I going to do with my life? You can't settle. So in your early med school and your intern days, were there moments that made you question your decision? What was it that kept you going through the initial challenges?
Med school was difficult for me intellectually because I was not a pre-med major. So when I decided I wanted to go to med school, I had to go back and take pre-med courses. I'd never had any. The only science course I had in college was they call it Rocks for Jocks, an archaeology course. And so I went back and took all the chemistry and biology and physics courses. So med school was a challenge for me academically, but it wasn't until later in med school, as you know, that you start to see things that are difficult. Most people go into medicine because they're devoted to principles of healing and wanting to help people, and eventually you realize you can't help everyone. So my most difficult part of med school on the surface was academically trying to make sure that I passed all my courses, but the rest of it was trying to adapt to the knowledge that we can't do as much good as we wish we could.
So, Dr. Collins, how did you get into orthopedic surgery at the Mayo Clinic? Were there any mental habits or strategies that helped you stand out?
Orthopedics is, I think, tends to draw a certain type of person. You get a lot of positive feedback in orthopedics. Most of the problems that people come to us with are fixable. The leg is broken, the joint is arthritic, the rotator cuff is torn, and we can fix all those things. Whereas other specialties do wonderful things, oncologists, but they don't cure all their patients. And people who manage diabetes and heart disease, I think orthopedics, perhaps it's people who are a little bit more insecure are drawn to orthopedics because there's always positive feedback. We're always fixing things, we're always making things better, and that's been a great source of pleasure and for me over my career.
Most definitely, sir. And you are also raising a family throughout most of your medical training. Can you share with us how that has impacted your life?
On the surface, people look at that and say, oh, that must have been hard. And certainly financially it was. By the time I finished my residency, I had 4 kids and I had to moonlight a lot in order to pay for that. So yeah, that part was difficult. Financially was difficult, but it also helps emotionally. I had a very loving and supportive wife who realized that a lot of the problems that our family faced were not under my control or direction. How much I had to work and how many hours I was on call and when I moonlit, those are things I just had to do. And, it requires a spouse who accepts that. Now, I didn't like it and I felt bad the times I was away from home, but I knew that I had to do it. My wife knew that I had to do it. And so she didn't hold it against me and in fact was supportive. There are times that young doctors, I think, come home tired and worn out and tend to forget that they have obligations at home too. So that's where a stable, loving marriage can be a very big help.
Certainly. And it goes without saying that orthopedic residency is extremely difficult. So, can you share with us what it really felt like over those years, physically, emotionally, spiritually, being an orthopedic
Yeah,
resident?
I wonder myself, I still talk to friends who are mentoring young orthopedic surgeons, and things are a lot different because when I was a resident, there's no limit on how many hours you could work. So we worked a lot of hours, and then on top of that, I moonlit, I don't know, once or twice a week. So I was working somewhere in the range of 100 hours a week, or I forget. At one point, I did the math trying to figure out how many hours a week I worked. So I think it is a little bit easier now because of the limits, and I guess we all sort of tend to subscribe to the notion that if doctors are going to be taking care of people, something should be done to make sure that they're not overly tired or so that they're at their best. But it still is a difficult road to hoe. And in my case, I think it helped a lot that, first of all, being young, I never could do it now, the stuff that I did when I was younger. It helped being an athlete. I always was in shape. I ran and played sports and all that. And that stuff helps. To some extent, orthopedic residency is like a marathon. I mean, you got to keep plugging away. And so being physically in shape, I found helped a lot too.
Absolutely, sir. And something you've noted is that I wasn't the smartest, just the most stubborn. What role does that kind of mental toughness play in medicine today, and what role did that mentality play throughout your journey?
I found it was very important for me when I went into medicine. I sort of had goals, and they are the same sort of idealistic goals that I think and hope most people going to medicine have. I wanted to help people. I wanted to do good things, and I wanted to make my life mean something more than just trying to make money. So it was um, it was important to me to try and reconnect to my ideals periodically. It's easy to forget them when you're overwhelmed with work and pressures and all sorts of um, people forcing you to do things that you ordinarily wouldn't do. We don't all control our fate 100% of the time. Sometimes we do what circumstances make us do. So I found it very helpful periodically to just go back and think about, well, wait a minute, what am I doing here? Why did I choose this life? I knew from the start it wasn't going to be easy, and so you just learn to suck it up and do what needs to be done.
Yeah, suck it up and do what needs to be done. Precisely. And sir, there's a lot of situations I'm sure you've been in where life or limb were at stake. Can you share how you kept your cool in the operating room during those moments?
I think some degree of self-knowledge is important, and I always tend to criticize myself for not having as much self-knowledge as I wish. I'm not all that introspective, but it's important to try to be somewhat introspective. And, as far as keeping your cool in the operating room, I know not all surgeons do. And in fact, there's sort of a stereotype of the prima donna, hot-tempered surgeon losing his cool in the operating room and, throwing instruments and those sort of things. I've found all that behavior to be counterproductive. You're in the operating room to do one specific thing. You need to replace this knee, or you need to save this limb, or save this life for that matter. And I never found it helpful to let emotions get in the way of that. And they can get in the way of it in many ways. One way is losing your temper, but other ways are not my last book was The Shieling, but the one before that was All Bleeding Stops, which is about a combat surgeon in Vietnam who let his idealism destroy him, I guess is a way to put it. And I've seen that in my career several times, that what draws us to medicine sometimes can be our downfall. We want doctors and young people to go into medicine because they care. But if you care too much, or if you aren't prepared to accept the fact that morbidity and mortality are real things and they're not going to go away. A doctor can't make you stop being mortal, and a doctor can't make you stop being morbid. So you're going to lose patients and you're going to lose battles. And so All Bleeding Stops was about a guy who couldn't do that. He tried as hard as he could, but he was overwhelmed by his failures. And I think that's where trying to control your emotions and to understand them is helpful.
Certainly, certainly. Yeah, understanding a doctor can play a significant role, but ultimately can't prevent morbidity and mortality. And fostering that sense of self-reflection could be important. Very interesting insight, sir. So can you tell us, who were some of the mentors that impacted you the most? What are some things they taught you that you didn't learn in the textbooks?
As far as specific mentors, I mean, in general, I would say my faith, and I don't mean that only Christians or Muslims or Jews can become good doctors, but faith was a big help for me. Specific mentors would be, just in a general sense, my father, who impressed upon me the importance of being a good person, doing good things. I was blessed by having a couple important mentors early in my medical career. In medical school, my advisor was a guy named Dr. Diamond, who was a wonderful man who continually pointed out to me as I was trying to decide, do I want to be an orthopod or a general surgeon or a pediatrician, whatever, the importance of remembering that you're a doctor first before you're a surgeon or whatever, and you have certain obligations on you from saying that I'm a doctor. In my residency, I had great mentors who, early on, one who sort of emphasized what Dr. Diamond told me about trying to focus on the tremendous debt that we owe our patients. And then I think where you train makes a big difference. And I'm very grateful to the people at the Mayo Clinic who would push us, but push us in a way that made us realize that what we're doing is important. You're not just earning a living. You're not just killing time. You're taking care of people. And you need to do a good job. That's your responsibility. So those things all help me a lot.
Absolutely, sir. So it seems like the general theme was a selfless focus, focusing not on your own personal interest, but rather what's in the best interest of the patient. Dr. Diamond noting that you're a doctor first before anything else, and with that comes a certain responsibility. And then some follow-on advice, focusing on what you can do for your patients, and ultimately just understanding that where you train can make a tremendous difference, and the people around you are very important. So on the note of impact and focusing on others, Dr. Collins, when did you realize that your impact would go beyond medicine and that writing would be part of your calling as well?
It's funny, as I mentioned to you, I did not go to college with the notion that I wanted to be a doctor. I just never thought about it. I was somewhat immature. So I wanted to be a writer long before I wanted to be a doctor. So I was thinking about writing even in college. And then in med school, I loved med school and I loved medicine, and I was thrilled at the chance that I could get to be a doctor. But I've decided along the way I wanted to tell this story because I thought it was an important story to tell. And so I wrote during my med school and residency days, not serious writing, but basically journaling or taking notes of things I did. And everyone who's trained as a doctor knows you can't remember all the things that happened to you. You know, I was in a sleep-deprived state, seemed like 90% of the time, and things I never would have remembered all these things if I didn't write them down. So I would spend time, you know, when I was on call, sometimes waiting for a case to begin, or otherwise I would write things. So I had all the notes all through med school and all through residency. And then when I left residency, I was in private practice, and that was very busy, and I had no time to write. But somewhere, I guess it was 12 years from when I finished my residency until I published Hot Lights, Cold Steel. That was my first book. So in one sense, you could say that book was almost 20 years in the making if you count going through med school and then residency and then the 12 years between residency and when it was published. But it was more like, 10 years or so. And when I first started to write, I wrongly assumed that I knew how to write because I thought, I went to college, I write op reports every day, and so I can write. But then my first draft of the book I thought was pretty poor. And so I decided, well, what do I need to do to get better? Just like with surgery or anything else. So I wound up going to writing courses. I took online courses at UCLA. I did all kinds of things to try and improve my writing. And that helped. And I realized, too, that I had a chance to maybe help people. Help isn't exactly the word, but for now, let's just say help people with my writing. That I could help them with my scalpel and with my medical training, but I could do things for people by the words that I wrote, and that meant a lot to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and it goes without saying that you have had that tremendous impact with your writing. I know, at least personally, when I was in the pre-med years, I picked up a copy of your book, and I was super inspired and very motivated to continue pushing to get into med school. So that's for sure.
Young people to go into medicine. I'm sure you've seen the statistics that all of us doctors see, that I forget if it's 50 or 70% of doctors today would not recommend their own children to go into medicine. And I did. I loved what I did. I thought medicine was a wonderful career, and I feel grateful, and I've had a wonderful life doing what I did. And I want to encourage young people to go into medicine. That was another reason why I wrote my first couple books.
Yeah, certainly. And I think it's definitely had that impact, which is a fantastic thing, really. And in your book, you write very honestly about fears that you've had. You write very honestly about failure. Do you think that this is something a lot of doctors struggle to come to terms with in their personal lives and in their practice?
I do, Curtis. And in fact, I struggled with it too. Let me see if I can read you something from Hot Lights, Cold Steel. And I was working on the emergency room surgical service, and I had a patient who was dying. She had a severe head injury, and she was only 20 years old, and it was obvious that she was going to die. And so this is the thoughts that I had to myself at the time. I suddenly realized how unprepared I was for all this. Oh, I had to have been sharp to get a residency at the Mayo Clinic. I knew my anatomy and physiology. I did well on the national boards. I had wonderful letters of recommendation from my deans. I came very well trained for the cognitive aspects of my work, but there was no training for the emotional aspects. Letters and board scores could never prepare me to lose the struggle to save a pregnant woman and her baby, or to watch a 20-year-old girl fry her brain. No, I was not prepared for such things, and they were beginning to rip me apart. How, I wondered, can life go on? How can my fellow residents and I continue to smile, to cut the lawn on our day off, and to have children? Of course, it would have been easier if we didn't care, and sometimes we actually pretended we didn't care. We would try to do our job and be detached. But we didn't go into medicine to be detached. We went into medicine because we cared. But caring kept bringing us pain and frustration and anguish. We had been training for years to become surgeons. We had excelled in college. We had excelled in medical school. Our lives had been one success after another until we woke up one day and there we were, surgical residents at the world-famous Mayo Clinic. It was all so perfect. But before we could congratulate ourselves, scarcely before we learned where the surgeon's locker room was, we discovered that this was a profession like no other that quickly and ruthlessly and uncaringly proclaimed that we were not perfect. People came to us with head injuries and we couldn't help them. People came to us with gunshot wounds and we couldn't heal them. People came to us with ruptured arteries and we couldn't save them. We kept confronting these terrible problems and we kept failing again and again and again. We who had always succeeded, who had always known what to do, who had always been so sure of ourselves. Never before had we attempted anything so important, and never before had we failed so miserably. And I think those are the things that doctors have to confront. It's not pleasant and it's not easy, but it's critically important to confront those things.
Do you think that's a challenge for a lot of physicians to confront those things? Because that's certainly not something we're taught in school.
I do think if you're going to have a healthy emotional life, I think you need to confront those things. As you know, and many of us doctors know, one way to deal with this issue is to ignore them or to be, I mentioned that sometimes we pretend we didn't care. Some doctors just build a fence around themselves and they don't care. Now, there's some benefit to that and you're protected from the emotions that might scar you or interfere with your ability to practice. But I don't think you're ever fully a physician or a human if you don't confront those things.
So can you tell us, what do you think real strength looks like in a surgeon, not just with their skill, but with their character?
I don't think it's much different than the strength that's required to be a good lawyer or a good mother or a good carpenter. I think you need to realize who you are and what your goals are and what it's going to take to accomplish those goals. Now, granted that what a surgeon does is more important, if I can put that in quotes, than what a carpenter does, but they're both important. And in order to accomplish the things that you have set your mind to, you need to be strong and to realize there's going to be difficulties and there's going to be obstacles and not everything about this is going to be good, but the overall goal is good, and that's what I focus on.
Certainly. And if you were mentoring a first-year student today, what inner traits or daily disciplines would you emphasize for them to succeed?
I do get to speak every now and then to people, and I love speaking to medical students, hoping that I can impress things upon them, which probably don't even need to be. I imagine that med students today are the same as med students were when I was there. But I'll read you, again, this is from All Bleeding Stops at the end, when an old doctor is dying and he's being taken care of by a young doctor who is an intern, and he sees that she is somewhat insecure. The intern's name is Megan. Megan continues to take his blood pressure every few minutes. With growing tenderness, Denis watches her fidgeting with the IV, biting her lip, eyes flitting from machine to the next, desperately seeking the reassurance she knows will never come. And then the old doctor thinks to himself, she thinks she is not a good doctor because she hasn't memorized enough textbooks or performed enough surgeries. She is so painfully aware of what she lacks, but she forgets that what we long for when we are sick, grievously sick, mortally sick, is not a cure. We know it's too late for that. What we long for is a healing, an assurance that the human connection that seems about to be dissolved forever will somehow bridge the deep chasm we are about to cross. Scalpels can't affect that. Textbooks can't teach it. But compassion, the simple, unaffected love of our fellow man can. The knowledge that someone cares, that we are not alone. Gestures, touches, smiles. And I think if young doctors and old doctors remembered that, I think it would benefit them and behoove them.
What impact do you think your faith has had on that mentality?
A great deal. And I always have trouble talking about faith. Faith is a very big part of my life, but I haven't reconciled the fact that there are many good people who don't have faith. And so I don't ever want to come across to people saying, well, if you don't have my kind of faith, then you're not a good person, or only through my way can you be a good doctor, be a good person. So faith has helped me a great deal, and I don't want to minimize what it means to me because it's been critical. I mean, it really has helped me through some difficult times, and it has helped me realize that some of my morality is in concert with the same type of desires that I want to have when I practice as a doctor.
Sure. That's important, and I think it's something that's deeply personal to everybody for them to forge their own path of faith, so to speak. So you mentioned a little bit how you've always had an interest in writing, but you were very busy throughout med school and residency, and you noted that your book was more or less 10 to 20 years in the making when it was finally published. So can you share with us a little more about how your idea turned into a publication, which was Hot Lights, Cold Steel, and being your first book, did you expect it to be as successful as it was? What surprised you the most about that process?
It was, first of all, it was fun. I mean, I like to write, and in some ways, there are some parallels with medicine. There are the joy of creativity of writing is similar to the feeling that you get from doing a good surgery or taking good care of a patient. The writing, I never knew what to expect when I wrote Hot Lights, Cold Steel. I mean, it meant a lot to me to write it, and I thought it was an important story to tell. One of the things that I've come to realize, and much of this insight came from other writers who, my life basically, I'm an orthopedic surgeon who happens to have written a few books. I would hesitate to call myself a writer in the sense of that being my main avocation. But other writers have shown me how much writing can teach you about yourself. And some of the things that I accomplished in writing this book were not consciously striven for on my part. I think it was more almost subconscious or under the surface that, I attempted to do one thing, and in doing that, I accomplished other things. And so that was a surprise for me.
Yeah. So some of the things you've discovered about yourself along the journey were some of the most surprising things that you didn't expect through writing the book?
Yes. Yeah.
So, Dr. Collins, what is one piece of advice you would give to somebody who's at a new road in the medical journey, be it a new medical student, resident, or attending physician?
I would first ask them to be cognizant of what I would call, and I don't mean to be overly dramatic, but the sacredness of our profession, that what we do and what they are about to embark upon is important and probably one of the most important things they're going to do in life. And I would encourage them to keep in mind the principles that drew most of us into medicine and keep those foremost. And having done that, the next thing I would do would be try and be reassuring. Because I firmly believe that for doctors, if your heart is in the right place, things tend to work themselves out, which doesn't mean there won't be difficult times, and it doesn't mean there might not be times when they question themselves and worry about things. But I guess I'm optimistic in the sense that I think people whose heart is in the right, or at least doctors anyway, whose heart is in the right place, will be able to work through the difficulties that they encounter in their practice.
Absolutely, sir. And throughout your career, of all the stories, all of the things you've experienced, what is one that changed how you see life or death or even just yourself? What is something that completely rocked your perspective?
I think, and it surprised me because I thought about this question, and I thought that my answer would be something like some of the tragedies that I encountered. We all have had circumstances where someone that we tried very hard to save we didn't save, or a surgery that we wanted to go well didn't go well, or various problems in medicine. And as I thought about it, the thing that I think impressed itself upon me the most was not so much the tragedies, but talking to the family after the tragedy. And sometimes, and I did that both as a medical student when I would go out with the attending, and as a medical student, I wouldn't say a word. I'd just be there to observe. And the attending would say, "I'm sorry, we did the best we could." And then you see what the family says. And then as I got into practice myself, working as a ER moonlighter, and then I had to be the one where I bring the bad news to the patients. All of a sudden, that really deeply affected me, realizing that the work we do and the efforts that we expend have tremendous effect on people. And I was always humbled by the way that people would react to bad news, because I think people too, even in these times of extreme stress, when they've lost a loved one or whatever, they haven't lost their humanity either. And I think they realize they can sense if their doctor did the best they could. And often I think they sense our sorrow and our anguish about that. And I would say that more than anything affected me was the reaction that the survivors or the families would have after I talked to them when things went bad.
Yeah, it's certainly an experience that can't be described anywhere outside of medicine. It's something I don't even have the words to describe it, really. It's just something that must be experienced, I would imagine, and just deeply, deeply impactful and challenging, to say the least. So if a young doctor or student forgets everything else that they've listened to in this podcast, Dr. Collins, what is one truth that you hope stays with them forever throughout their career?
I think for them to realize that what we do is important, and easing suffering and relieving pain and all the things that we attempt to do as doctors is important. And with that should come the realization that we're not always going to be successful. But what's important is that we don't let it get us down and that we continue to try.
Just keep pushing. Just keep pushing, staying resilient. Yeah. So as we wrap it up here, Dr. Collins, what do you think it truly means to have a physician's mind, and how can a young doctor work to build one?
I think it's important for young doctors to occasionally ask themselves, why am I doing this? Or maybe to remind themselves why I am doing this. Circumstances, especially now, I think it's a hard time to be a young doctor. Things are a lot different than they were before. I really regret and decry the intrusion of the commercial world into medicine, and that there's more and more pressures on doctors to think about things which have some importance, but are not the main important thing. And so to continue to ask yourself, why am I doing this? And what's important to me? And most people, I think, if they can keep those things in mind, will find themselves much happier in their career.
Thank you for that piece of advice, sir. Dr. Collins, it's been fantastic to have the opportunity to speak with you. You had a profound impact on my journey along my medical career, and you continue to inspire people every day with your work. And again, it's a great honor to have had the opportunity to speak with you, sir. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you for asking me.